afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone, and I welcome you. I'm Deb Hackathorn. I'm the Senior Vice President for Government Affairs at Civic Point, and I'm also a member of CMC's Board of Trustees. As an aside, I'm also a proud representative in government affairs for several different associations and companies in the bioscience, biomedical space, so we're thrilled to have all of you here. CMC's Optimal Health Series is presented by the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center and by Nationwide Children's Hospital. Today's forum is sponsored by Cardinal Health, BioOhio, Armatus Bio, Andelin Biosciences, and Jobs Ohio. The live stream today is presented by the Emergency Response Fund at the Columbus Foundation in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. Let's thank all of those for supporting today's forum. As you might guess, Central Ohio is rapidly becoming a key player in cell and gene therapy, promising to turn the state into, this is a Silicon Valley, but aren't we calling it the Silicon Heartland now, for this cutting-edge medical technology. Cell and gene therapy are related fields that share a goal of modifying genetic material to fight diseases or improve the way the body functions. Today, we will explore the race to develop life-changing and sometimes life-saving cell and gene therapies that are being worked on here in Central Ohio. On behalf of today's sponsor, the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center, please help me welcome Dr. Marcos de Lima, Director of the Blood and Bone Marrow Transplant and Cellular Therapy Program at the James Comprehensive Cancer Center, to introduce today's panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'm supposed to give you a 2-second blurb about myself so I don't delay the panelists, but I just want to say I've joined Ohio State about a year ago with the mission of sort of helping reorganize our already thriving cell therapy program. So, and as a means of just brag a little bit, we just got our first FDA approval for in-house manufactured CAR T. So we will be reaching patients probably mid-April. So we're very proud of that. Things are happening, and I'm so happy that I have a chance of connecting with all these people here. That half of them, obviously, I didn't know. So I'm very honored to have this opportunity. So that's it. Without further ado, I'm supposed to welcome the speakers. So Sam Jaglowski, Dr. Jaglowski, my colleague and boss at Ohio State. She says no, that I'm her boss, but it's the other way. And she's an associate professor, but already has been promoted to full professor, so she doesn't have the badge yet, but she's a full professor of medicine at Ohio State. And by her side, Dr. Miller, Timothy Miller, who is the CEO, president, and co-founder of Forge Biologics, powerhouse, as we all know. And by his side, Dr. Eli Phillips, who is the vice president for specialty solutions with Cardinal Health. And finally, Eddie Pauline, who is the president and CEO of BioOhio. So thank you.
All right, thank you. So I've been the introducer of the forum, similar to Deb's role before, but this is my first hosting, so hopefully I don't mess this up. One thing that I just wanted to mention before I speak here is that we're going to try to accomplish a lot in the next 40 minutes. We're going to try to digest some really complex material today. We're probably not going to achieve a full understanding of what the opportunity really is here, but I would invite you to kind of stay close to the conversation and feel free to participate in ongoing learning through organizations like BioOhio and others as we continue to determine how this industry is going to impact Central Ohio. So let me begin by saying when I joined BioOhio last August, my first order of business was to take on a listening tour of our members, board members, and innovative bio and life science organizations across the state to hear about their concerns, opportunities, ambitions, and what they need from BioOhio now and in the future. What I heard, and what many are now realizing, is that bioscience, specifically gene and cell therapy technology, is rapidly evolving and growing in our state. Ohio is tied for 4th among states in number of identified gene therapy startups and cell therapy startups. Fueled by our robust network of research institutions, Ohio and Central Ohio are at the heart of what bioscience was, is, and will become in our country. But bioscience in our state is not one city, one industry, one university, or one company. From our agricultural and manufacturing roots to the life sciences, biomedical research, and what we are here to talk about today, cell and gene therapy, we are delivering groundbreaking discoveries and creating a new economic engine for the state of Ohio. BioOhio, with 35 years of organizing and advocating for our member investors, is excited to grow and adapt with this industry. For example, we're already working to establish a Gene and Cell Therapy Council within BioOhio that will allow us to better represent the unique needs and advocacy needs of this industry. We're also serving on Ohio's Rare Disease Advisory Council, which is full of patient advocates that are suffering from rare diseases that this technology is going to help address. And we will be working very hard to bring Ohio to the forefront of any state and national discussion about our industry. And why shouldn't we? We have more than 4,200 bioscience companies in the state. We have a growing talent pool of more than 80,000 bioscience employees, not including healthcare providers. And Ohio continues to grow its talent pipeline. We have currently awarded in 2020 over 11,000 bioscience-related degrees and certificates in this industry. 3 dynamic organizations and experts contributing today to the economic development, health, and social well-being of our local and global communities are, fortunately for us, right here in Central Ohio. I'm thrilled to speak with them and about the role that they are playing in gene and cell therapy development. And let's start there. Again, complex. At the most basic level, cell therapy involves the transfer of healthy cells into a patient to replace diseased, aging, or missing cells, with the goal of curing or reducing the impacts of disease. Gene therapy, meanwhile, allows researchers to treat genetic disorders and disease by modifying or inserting individual genes. Due to their potential to create life-saving, targeted, and long-term cost-saving treatments for complex medical conditions, we've seen exponential growth in both of these bioscience fields across the state and country. In Central Ohio, for instance, we've witnessed more than $10 billion in funding for gene therapy startups alone since 2018. While overall, Ohio pharmaceuticals and therapeutic companies, which include cell and gene therapies, raised more than $400 million last year. Cambridge-based Sarepta Therapeutics invested over $30 million in a new 85,000 square foot research facility at Easton. And homegrown companies like Andolin Biosciences, Amplify Bio, Forge Biologics, and Tim, I think that's 185,000 square feet of development, are adding to their ecosystem with their facility development. So that said, this is an exciting time for a really important industry in the state of Ohio. So let's talk more now about Central Ohio's role and how it's fueling this growth and will continue to expand. So let me begin. And we rehearsed this a little bit, but this is going to be a fluid conversation. And maybe start with Tim. What are the unique and superior capabilities that Central Ohio and Ohio has to offer that make us an attractive place for gene and cell therapy companies?
Well, looking out at this room, probably a lot of the people in this room, walking through the door today and looking out again on a lot of my colleagues, seeing Matt, Margaret, Allison, nice to see you again in person for the first time, really. Jen at OSU. These are a lot of the people in this state that have led, a lot of the both investments, the tech transfer, to help basically bridge a lot of these companies, to help start a lot of the startup companies that have really raised a lot of the money that Eddie was talking about a few minutes ago. So if you're asking, I think one of the things is the people, but it's also how they've helped bridge the technology into new startups.
And Eli?
Yeah, happy to address it. So good morning, everyone. So good to be with live people for the first time in a long time. Great to see everyone. I think Eddie hit the key word, it's ecosystem. And what we're really trying to build here in Central Ohio is really an ecosystem of everything from drug development, which is the very early phases of a drug's life, all the way through clinical development and clinical supply. It takes so many different stakeholders, so many different players to really digest this. And one thing I want to really, if you take nothing else away from my discussion today, I want you to think about the impact that these cell and gene therapies are going to have on the entire healthcare system as we know it. These are products that the system was not built for. It was not built for things such as cures. For the first time ever, we're talking about curing disease states. And I want you to think for just a second what that means from a patient perspective or from a clinical perspective. What diseases can we cure today? Well, we don't really cure diabetes. We don't cure hypertension. We don't cure migraine, right? We treat the symptomology. We treat these conditions. We manage these conditions. But for the first time ever, we're talking about cures. That's a big statement. It's a big deliverable to think about. Together, we need this ecosystem. We need strong drug development. We need logistics, which we have here in the state of Ohio. We need funding. We need development. All these things come into play to create the strongest healthcare system that we could possibly develop. And there's no reason that Central Ohio and the greater state of Ohio can't be that lead player in this space.
Do you have anything to add?
Yeah, it's great to be here, to actually see people's faces in person. One thing I would add, and it sounds a little bit funny to say this since we're talking about such a new and dynamic therapy, is experience. Is something that we bring to the table. Ohio State's been doing cell therapy since the early 1980s in the form of stem cell transplantation. We are the biggest program in the state of Ohio. We do as many transplants as every other program combined. So I think this is something that, when it comes to knowing how to take care of patients receiving cellular and gene therapy, we've already got this great infrastructure at Ohio State, Nationwide Children's. It's set up to, help us get these therapies to patients and to cure them.
Yeah, Sam, I'm glad you brought up our research institutions again. They're really Nationwide Children's, Ohio State, and the innovation that's coming out of them. That is the fuel for this industry. And as those institutions continue to do the great work to recruit experts in this space, it's only going to lead to continued growth. And that's occurring in Cincinnati. That's occurring up in Cleveland as well with those institutions. So I'll come back to you, Sam, then. As an innovator in this space, what is most exciting for you to continue this work?
I think just all of the possibility. We're kind of at a spot now where we have FDA-approved therapies for patients with B-cell malignancies, moving into being able to talk about potentially curative therapies for other kinds of cancers, for inborn errors of metabolism. Just the opportunity is so vast, and we're not at the same place, across the board. We've got opportunities to talk about improving exposure, access for patients with lymphoma, developing therapies for patients with rare diseases, as you mentioned. I think, the sky's the limit. It's so wide open.
And Tim, maybe speak to not only the science, but again, as a business leader in this space, what are some exciting things that are occurring in the business itself?
Yeah, so 2020, I think, saw $1.4 billion invested in biotech companies out of about 2.3 for the state total. That's still only about 1% of the national average of the money that was invested in biotech companies. That was one of the biggest years in Ohio's history for raising, and just really continues to support, I think, the upward trajectory of Central Ohio, and being a leader. When we look back over the last 10 years, Nationwide Children's Hospital in particular, was at the forefront of what we look back on and we think of in the gene therapy space from the capsid wars or the route of administration wars, and we really kind of go down that path. So when we look into the future, we're thinking about technologies that you mentioned that we're talking about functional cures. And when we think about, what's the next 20 years going to bring, we're thinking about, the money that's going to be invested to lead things like multiple routes of injections with multiple viruses, down that path. It's years away because the regulators aren't there yet, but a lot of the business leaders, I think, are willing to start to embrace that level of risk. And the FDA in particular has come out and said, we're really here to help assess a risk-to-benefit ratio for a lot of these patients. And again, with Zolgensma's approval, is just a really great example of how technology that's invested here in Columbus, can be brought forward to something that's really beneficial to the world.
We want to keep more of those here, too.
Keep those here, yes.
We can talk about that later. Eli, how does sort of similar question, but how does a corporate, an industry titan play in this space at Cardinal?
No one player, no matter how big you are, Cardinal Health, $160 billion annual revenue of a business, even we are not so big that we can control the entire environment here. We need partners and strong partnerships. We look at the Ohio State University partnership that we have. We're looking at creating new fellowships for research, new grant-based opportunities where we can actually come together to research the needs. And part of this is not just the therapeutic side, right? I think we can all appreciate what it means to cure a disease. I think, logically it makes sense to do so. But there's a whole host of other things we have to make investments in. How do patients want to be engaged? What does the quality of life look like for patients? Those are areas that we're trying to invest in to make sure that people live the longevity and the fun, the most fulfilling life they possibly can. So we're looking at partnerships. Logistics is what Cardinal Health is known for, so we obviously put a lot of investment in the logistics side. But we're also trying to help our drug development and drug manufacturing partners bring these products to market. And as Tim had mentioned, listen, there is a regulatory gap here. One of the big ones is the regulations are antiquated. They're dated. They're not ready for technologies that move at a speed of light, that move so quickly. They're not necessarily ready for a different safety and efficacy profile from what they're used to for drugs, where again, here we are curing disease. What does that mean? So these are places that we're looking at. One of the areas that we're really focusing in on is patient and provider education. So when we talk about these therapies, one thing it's important to note, they have this incredible promise of cure, but they also come with some pretty heavy adverse events and side effects right now. And we need to make sure that patients are aware of that they understand what they're signing up for, that even though there could be a high risk, there's a high reward that could be associated with that as well. So how do we educate patients and what that means? How do we educate providers, healthcare providers, to help them navigate these new systems of order management, of reimbursement? All these things come into play here. So as Cardinal Health, we're trying to take a leading position in this to try and help each of the stakeholders with bringing these really necessary medications, life-saving medications to market.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we've got a room of highly influential people, leaders, stakeholders in Central Ohio, and probably thousands tuning in online. What would you suggest the community does to trigger even more growth in this industry? What specifically can Central Ohio do to trigger some of that? Tim?
Well, there's, I think, a couple of different avenues that we would go down. I mean, there's a lot of government areas that I think, we can think about on how to push forward new technologies out of the universities, right? To do a lot of academic industry partnerships. It's one simple area. Another one's going to be workforce development, right? We all think about how we're going to hire more people into Ohio in particular. And while we see a bit of a boomerang effect right now, the pandemic has had an interesting, I think, effect on people wanting to move back into the Midwest and into Ohio. But again, workforce development programs where there's programs between the universities and industry, I think is a great way for us to kind of continue to build the ecosystem.
Sam, from your perspective, anything in particular?
I feel like I'm contractually obligated to mention Pelotonia at this point. But, I think in addition to what Tim said, we love community engagement. We welcome members of the community to come see what we're doing, see if this is something that they feel would be worth putting some of their hard-earned money into. We do have this fantastic mechanism at OSU in Pelotonia where 100% of the proceeds go to fund our research. So, in terms of even ride, donate, it's small things that people can do to be involved.
Great. So you may have recalled we've been through a pandemic recently, and I guess we're still in it. But COVID-19 impacted a lot of different industries. What do you think how did the pandemic and people's perception of treatment impact this industry, both maybe in a negative and positive way? Eli?
Yeah, I'm happy to take the lead on this. I'll tell you the first thing that happened, we had a major stalling out in the cell and gene space over the last 2 years. And part of the reason was many clinical trials that were in process or about to be kicked off were halted. Patients weren't going to clinical trial locations. They weren't going to see providers. So we had a little bit of a lull in sort of the development aspects. It put us probably a year or two behind. The other thing that we've learned from COVID, patients want to be engaged differently. You know, how many people, and I'm just curious if I can pull the room if you don't mind for a second, when was the last time someone in here actually used the telephone to call and order a pizza? Right? It's pretty unusual, right? I see one person out of a group of 140, but largely we are, you know, we have been so trained now to use our phone for everything but a phone, right? We're engaging differently. Yeah, I'm sure many of you might have this argument at home that, you know, you don't want to be the one to call and schedule an appointment because you don't want to have to talk to someone, right? We've all seen that. You want your spouse to call. They can do the talking. They're going to ask me questions. They're going to ask me what my name is. They're going to ask me what my birthday is for an appointment. You know, I don't want to do these things. So the phone and technology has evolved to allow us to have this engagement without having that, you know, uncomfortable discussion. I think that's very applicable to this space in cell and gene because patients have been receiving care differently over the last 2 years. Telemedicine, telepharmacy, virtual visits, we've all seen advertisements for it, and part of it was out of necessity, but I think part of it was this was going to happen regardless. We just accelerated those timelines. So now what we're seeing is the patients expect to receive care in the home. Your home is now your laboratory. Your home is your diagnostics facility. It's your infusion center. So much happens in the home. Now we need to figure out how does this apply to cell and gene. And one of the ways that we could think of as this applying, one of the easy sort of slam dunks on this is remote patient monitoring. So are we able to get into a place where we can actually discharge patients quicker or have them receive therapy at home where we can monitor them remotely from their own home, make it more comfortable than having them admitted to a hospital for 3 weeks or 4 weeks, or whatever that time is. So again, we continue to evolve, we continue to learn from this digital side. Another area that we're seeing in drug development is what I'll call sort of decentralized clinical trials, where you're now able to participate in the clinical trial from home for a variety of different needs. Some things you're going to have to go to a facility for. It's too severe of a side effect profile that you wouldn't be expected to have these things taken at home. But even this rise of decentralized trials, where you're able to be part of a clinical trial at home, that's really changed the industry as well. So I think much more to come. We're just scratching the surface of it, but certainly there's an interaction between digital and the advent of cell and gene therapies.
And Tim, any observation of the pandemic impact on either the success or growth of
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily have thought that I was going to have to raise a Series A and a Series B in a pandemic. That's not wasn't forecasted. But you know, as we look out, I think from the business side, one of the things that, and I'm sure Mike Triplett could probably comment on this too, is that it's been a lot easier to meet with investors because everyone's all of a sudden said, hey, you don't need to come to our office anymore to do a pitch. So that's one of the things I think in some respects has actually gotten easier for technologies, and particularly in gene and cell therapies. But again, acknowledging that the market has been a challenge for all biotech. It's been an interesting, I think, Eli commented on it as well, how we just think about, what's coming up next, right? And I think that, in the second half of 2022, we're going to see a lot more great clinical data come out from that's really, even though the patients haven't been able to go to as many of the sites, there's still great data coming out this year. That's going to have, I think, all ships rise type of approach.
And Sam, maybe talk a little bit about, again, from a patient perspective, like what are you trying to put in my body? You're going to put a cell in, you're going to put a new gene in, what's it going to do to me? I didn't want microchip before, now I'm going to get, what are you trying to do? Do you run into this issue, and is there more hesitation because of the pandemic? Or has it opened things up?
Honestly, no, I think, especially early on, a lot of the patients who are coming to us are just incredibly excited to be part of something that is new and innovative. From the cancer space, they don't have a lot of options. I mean, in terms of, response rates to next line of therapy for a patient with diffuse large B-cell lymphoma that's relapsed or refractory, the likelihood of them surviving, longer than 12 months is somewhere in the single digits compared to 40% when we're talking about our FDA-approved therapies. So, I mean, you throw those numbers at them and they're just excited. We can definitely do better. There are some interesting mental gymnastics that I've definitely experienced with patients in terms of, transplant, and it fascinates me that I have been able to talk them into getting, these modified therapies, and I can't talk them into getting a COVID vaccine because you're gonna put a microchip in me, what? So I don't understand how they trust me enough for one, but not the other, but that's, a conversation for another day. But yeah, no, I think for the most part, you sit down, you're going to invest an hour in talking to a patient, but by the time you go through, here's the risks, the benefits, what we can do. For the most part, people are really excited to be a part of it.
It raises a really interesting point. One thing that we have to take into consideration, we don't have long-term profiles on these products. So when we think about that safety and the efficacy of these products, we don't know what it's going to do 30 years after administration. And again, in many of these conditions today, folks don't live that long, right? These are very terminal type of conditions that we're using these in. But as these expand in more chronic conditions, and that's inevitably where we're going to go, the agency, the FDA that is, has now taken an approach of, we need some sort of long-term monitoring of these products to really understand that safety and efficacy profile. So the recommendation today is almost 20 years of long-term monitoring for these products to understand how it evolves in patients. And what does that safety and efficacy look like for the long term? So we'll get there in time. And again, all the initial indications are highly positive, but it is one of the adverse sides or the downsides. We have to understand that long-term effect in the patient population.
Yeah, but I'll chime in there on just kind of one observation. I don't think of that as actually a negative. When we're talking about therapies here that are the first of its kind in the world, and when we think about, some of the therapies that are out there, these are children, these are babies that would have died within 2 or 3 years worth of birth. If you're telling me that 20 years from now, we're going to need to think about maybe they got a tumor in their liver that they were actually able to live a healthy life, that they would not have had, and give those parents and those families that type of life, pretty sure that gene therapy did its job.
And again, I've been in this role 8 months and have had an opportunity to hear some of these stories of this life-saving technology and the terrible, rare, and chronic diseases that are hopefully going to be eliminated by this technology. And there's been some tear-jerking moments in this learning. And again, we're talking about diseases that are affecting 5,000 people on the planet, maybe less. So these drugs, these technologies take a lot of time and money to develop and cost a lot to eventually be delivered. What are some things that we need to do to continue to overcome the patient access piece of this and availability of access to these medicines, these treatments?
Well, that's a fun one. Anybody out there?
We've got some patient advocates here today too. That I don't know if you want to raise your hand, but people that have direct experience with this issue.
Patient foundations and patient, exposure to rare disease patients is really a part of why I got into this job. And I don't know if you're a Marvel or a DC fan out there, okay, but when Batman tells Flash, in Justice League, he says, "Just save one," right? And then you know what to do. I'm always a fan that, with the challenges that we've had over the past 10 years in this space, one of the biggest constraints has been manufacturing, right? And manufacturing of some of these gene therapies or cell therapies has been a significant challenge. And for those of you that to kind of put this a little bit into context, so many of you have heard of the disease Duchenne muscular dystrophy, right? One of the more common genetic diseases. When you're trying to treat a child or a juvenile that weighs about 40 or 50 kilograms, and you go out with the typical dosing that's given out there right now in a clinical trial, and you think, well, how much gene therapy does that actually really mean? If I wanted to go out in 2023 and treat okay, 25% of the existing Duchenne patients that are out there, just the existing ones, not the new ones that would be born next year, okay, it would take 50%, actually it's 47%, but almost 50% of the existing manufacturing capacity in the entire United States just to treat 25% of one genetic disease. And we talk about 7,000 rare genetic diseases that are out there. Over 90% of them don't actually have anything being worked on. That's not just the science, that also has to do with the manufacturing. It's why there's companies in Ohio that have such a great business model, because to meet that unmet demand. You know, but a lot of that came from, originally, a lot of the desire to try to treat patients that have nothing else open for them.
If I can leave a little bit of a provocative question and ask here, what I'll say is, yeah, be very careful. If you think custom cabinets are expensive, wait until you buy your first custom cell bag that's to be infused. Just wait. What I'll tell you is there's going to be a big question that we're going to have to answer as society. And that question is, how do we put a value on a human life? It's maybe a little more straightforward when it is an infant, when it's a baby and someone that's going to have that long-term quality of life. That we think. 13, but depending on who, right? So do we put that similar value on a 102-year-old individual who has 17 different chronic conditions and may benefit from one of the conditions from one of the therapies? And it's just a provocative question to think about as we go forward. And society is going to have to answer, because in the end, society is going to have to pay the costs associated with the products. There are different models we use today for that. Right now we have a health insurance model. It's really not an insurance, but we could debate that for a different forum, I think, a different CMC discussion. But again, just questions for us to start thinking about. What does that look like longer term, and where do we draw the lines? It might be different between gene therapies and cell therapies also.
Yeah, actually, the government actually did that study, and it came up as part of the pricing for Zolgensma at one point. And actually, it was $13 million. That's the price of what human in the United States can contribute into society. So, that's what, a lot of groups on the reimbursement side start looking at, right, on how you measure this type of cost. So if you can give someone a normative life, can they contribute back? Not that I'm advocating for it, just saying that that's basically how it's being held up.
I think all of those are really great points. When we did the first clinical trial, phase 2 trial for the pivotal study for Kymriah, we enrolled 12 patients at Ohio State. We treated 5 because we couldn't get cells to us. 7 patients died waiting for cells to get to us, which is unacceptable, absolutely unacceptable. So I think, manufacturing, absolutely. Right now, we still have patients on wait lists to get FDA-approved products. These patients deteriorate in that time. They have less, they have increasingly poor results the longer they wait to get cells. The other thing that we see is kind of starting to parallel what we've seen in transplant for decades, in that there is a difference between people who can get to us and people who can't get to us to get therapies. And we're seeing this play out in cell therapy again, where you've got kind of an exacerbation between your haves and your have-nots. Digital therapies or digital access, I think, is one thing that we can definitely lean on to try to help with some of these problems, but it is something that we're going to have to be super cognizant as we're rolling out more therapies to more things like, eventually breast cancer, colon cancer, these really common types of malignancies that we don't create a class situation, or further exacerbate a class situation.
Okay, so we already established that there's a lot of great things going on in this industry, in this community, in this state. A lot of growth, a lot of investment. If we're looking at the sort of ideal environment, where one which will say, you know what, Ohio, Columbus, we've nailed it. We are now the center of the universe for gene and cell therapy. Sorry, Boston, it's now Columbus. What does that look like here? What's changing? What brands are here? What does Forge look like? What does Amplify Bio look like? What happens to what are these institutions and organizations looking like when we've become the center of the universe for this?
Well, you could say if you build it, they will come, and part of that is really investment dollars. in the end, a lot of what drives a lot of the innovation is going to be fundraising, whether private or public, whether academic or otherwise. So, one of the great things that I feel like I keep reading on LinkedIn is that there's more and more companies that are coming and building plants here, not just in the biotech sector, but, industry adjacent to what we think about, right? Seeing that there's a big plant that's going to come and put, 400 jobs here that's going to be, those people will be able to jump back and forth at some point. So I think that as we think about more and more things that are being built here and the attractiveness of Columbus and the really middle of Ohio, that's what I think the industry is starting to see a bit more. And that's really something that I think we should be highlighting.
I would add from our perspective, a lot of this has to do with the handoffs. If we take down the silos, you have a manufacturing silo and a logistics silo and a clinical silo. And if we eliminate those silos and we have strong, smooth handoffs between all the stakeholders and players, that would put Ohio seriously on the map. Because wherever you go, whether it's Boston, Cambridge, New Jersey, Philly, West Coast out in San Francisco, I don't know that there's an area that has really figured out how to do those handoffs better and with the patient in mind. So an example could be to draw a software link out there. Can we have the proper tracking ability that we understand from the time a patient is admitted to the hospital to the time the manufacturing takes place, all the way through that life cycle of the product, all the way through the patient experience? Then again, I think that you have an ecosystem that doesn't exist elsewhere, and there's no reason we can't do that here in Ohio. We have all the players here, and many of them are in this room, that we can come together and figure out how do we strip down the silos and make it more of an integrated approach across the entire life cycle of the product.
In my perfect universe, I would have a product for every patient who comes my way. So I would not have to send a patient to Boston or California to enroll in a clinical trial. My idea of an ideal ecosystem would be that I could treat any patient with a cellular therapy or a gene therapy product who needs to be treated.
Hopefully we're on our way. Okay. I don't think this is provocative, but it'll be a surprise to the three of you because we didn't talk about it. If there was one homework item you would give to the audience today that would improve their understanding of the opportunity that we have before us, what would that homework item be?
I feel like I'm waiting for a clock to start ticking or something, but maybe I can take that first. If there was a piece of homework, gosh, I think it would be to have an understanding about what is really a benefit of a gene therapy versus a cell therapy, and just how do you think about targeting different diseases? I mean, I can give you a hint, okay, and that one of them is that we think of genetic diseases in two main buckets: stuff where you can identify the gene that's causing the disease and ones that you can't, right? So understanding which ones can be targeted by a gene in cell therapy and ones that can't is a really fundamental understanding of just how you think about where you want to put investment dollars, where you want to do technology, manufacturing something that comes out after that. But there you go. That's my homework assignment.
This is a big ask, but continue to make this an awesome place to live. We're trying to recruit people to this area. We're trying to recruit people that are, there's a very narrow number of people that actually have experience in this area, and that's true. It's an emerging technology. There's only so many people to draw from. To the extent that we can make this an awesome place to live, even more so than it already is, we'll draw that talent in here. One thing we didn't address during the COVID pandemic, we've learned that so many people can do their jobs remotely now. It's actually kind of dinged us a little bit on the recruitment side, because people can do their research investigation from anywhere in the world, or at least anywhere in the country, and so many jobs have been sort of remoticized, if you will. To the extent that we get them back in this ecosystem here in Columbus and make this an awesome place to live, we'll be able to recruit people that much easier. And so I think that's a big part of the personnel development and certainly the economic development as well.
I think one thing I would add, I always tell my parents that patients that the internet is a vast and scary place, and for the most part they should avoid it. But there are some really good informational videos out there, for example, on the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society website, bethematch.com. There, in anything where you have, exciting therapies pop up, you also have people trying to take advantage of that. So I think for the community, really become informed consumers of what's available. So, you know what's a good thing to support.
Yeah, one last kind of comment, it's that, find the good stories that are out there, and I'll tell 20 seconds to tell just a good story about something around Columbus. So one of the gene and cell therapy companies that I had founded was called BioOhio Therapeutics, and it came right out of Nationwide, and it was because of Matt and Margaret's really, really hard work to help make that happen, and the investigators that were there. That came out of Nationwide Children's Hospital. And about 2 years ago, there was a child that was identified actually just outside Columbus that had one of the rare diseases that could actually be potentially treated with a gene therapy. And due to fortune, again, if you think different ways you think about it, that child was born here in Columbus, in the only place really in the world that they could actually get this type of gene therapy. And when you work with a lot of the rare disease families, you have to understand just how difficult it is for them to travel, to be able to get to these different places, to be able to do these, to go to all the follow-up visits. So this child was able to go to Nationwide Children's Hospital and get treated by Kevin Flanagan, who's an amazing investigator and plays a great trumpet too, by the way. But and this child just had their last follow-up visit at about 2 years. The gene therapy changed the projection of the trajectory of this child's life, and that happened right here in Columbus for a family that was born here in Columbus. And for one last plug, they're actually having an awareness day for this and a support day at the Columbus Blue Jackets on April 22nd, Friday. And so a bunch of us are going to go to that and wear t-shirts and stuff. I'm sure it'll be online somewhere, but it's a great story that comes out of Columbus being supported in Columbus by institutions out of Columbus with technology out of Columbus, funded in Ohio. So just learn about those stories. They're out there.
One thing before either Sam or Eli comments is that we always move to questions for our live stream and in-person audience. So if you do have a question, start thinking about that, and we'll move to the microphone here in a second. But Eli, I don't know if you wanted to.
I no additional comment.
Okay. All right. Sam, any stories, compelling stories that?
Plenty. And
Just one.
yeah, no, I do. I've got a number of patients that I would not expect to be alive today. And, a lot of them do give back to the James. I have one who has a podcast where he and his wife talk about it. And this was, they're all my favorite patient, right? But he's kind of one of my favorite patients in particular. By the time he got to us, this was sort of early in it where we were having, manufacturing issues. It was taking us a long time to get cells, so he was getting sicker and sicker. We were having to do some interesting things to get him ready to get his cells. Did not think he was going to survive the first week, and he did. And 2 years later, he is thriving, and his daughter's graduating from college, and his son just opened up a hair salon up at Graceland, and you couldn't tell we did anything to him. He's living a completely normal, healthy life. And I've got a lot of these stories, and it's really cool to be a part of.
Well, and again, we as BioOhio and an organization that's representing this industry, we're going to ensure that we put out content and other pieces that will help you all understand more about the industry and what you can do to be helpful. So keep an eye out for that. It is CMC's long-standing tradition to take audience questions. Mantra Moody of CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. For our in-house audience, please join Mantra at the microphone, and please keep your questions brief and to the point. Mantra, what is our first question?
All right, thank you. So the first question is, how do the side effects of these therapies compare to chemotherapy?
That one. For cell therapy, we do use chemotherapy to condition, to reduce the number of lymphocytes before we give patients cell therapy. So they do actually get a small dose of chemotherapy. It's a different brand of side effects. We see something called cytokine release syndrome, which is essentially like super flu, where someone releases a very similar cytokine. So we can see fevers, chills. We can control it. We see neurologic toxicities, but it's self-limited. The thing that is really cool about it is, a lot of times it's, we treat and then we're done, as opposed to chemotherapy where we're going on and on for multiple cycles of treatment for something that we don't expect to be curative. So it can be intense, but it's manageable, and then we're done with it. So I think most patients, when I'm talking to them a year or two later, are amazed at how good they feel.
Yeah, and on the gene therapy side, it's a little different because the chemotherapy is meant to go in and kill cells. Gene therapy is usually meant to go in and give something back, okay? And basically you give it to replace something that's usually not functioning correctly. So that's meant to then reduce toxicology buildup of a particularly pathological substance that was the cause of the disease. So very, very different than like a chemotherapy approach.
Okay, I think we have a first in-person question.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Lemonchuk with CareSource. And Eli kind of alluded to this already, what my question is, and that are these companies perhaps partnering or working with group health insurance companies or individual health insurance companies with the data? Because otherwise we'll have all these wonderful technologies, but only exclusive few can afford it, or those that get it they'll be alive, but then they'll be bankrupt. Because I don't think cost and quality should be mutually exclusive when it comes to health care.
Absolutely. So we actually have a division known as real-world evidence. And what our team does is they try and evaluate the new and upcoming therapeutics compared to what the standard of care is currently. So if you think about a clinical trial, clinical trials have been the gold standard of drug development for 100 years now, but we have some gaps with clinical trials, and Jeff had alluded to it. One of the gaps is very few patients have ever been enrolled in a clinical trial. And so when they are enrolled in a clinical trial, the results that we get are not necessarily generalizable to the entire patient population. Now, we're talking about some rare and very ultra-rare even conditions that there just aren't a lot of patients that even have it. So clinical trials may or may not be the best way to proceed, but what we can do is we can at least continue to compare the results alongside of what's experienced in the real world to those in clinical trials. So with that information, we're now armed to go to the payers. And as Tim had mentioned, take a look at that total cost of care. Take a look at the value of a life to try and get the payers to pay for it. I will tell you that traditionally, when we're dealing with an infant population, payers almost always lose that lawsuit. So if a patient continues to, assuming they have commercial insurance, assuming they continue to go through the appeals process and ultimately in a litigation system, the patient's probably going to win. It gets a little bit muddier when it's, again, elderly folks, and we can talk through that offline. But I think that the access point that Jeff raises is a real one. We have to figure out how do we ensure that every patient that could benefit from these therapies are able to maintain access to the therapy without cost barriers, and those are actively being worked on today.
Yeah, Jeff, and just one kind of comment too. From a pure play gene therapy perspective, there are so few that have actually been approved and moved to a reimbursement strategy. That's one of the things that's actually the challenge in the space right now. The FDA has signaled that they anticipate approving up to 25 new gene therapy products by 2025. So a lot of this is going to be worked out, I think, and some of the models are just starting to really come up. But this is something that the industry overall is really trying to still work out on how to provide access.
Go ahead.
Hi, thank you for the organizers. This has been wonderful. This is my first BioOhio event. My name is Jeffrey Feld. I'm with Geosite and with Curex Biosystems. I'm glad we're talking about clinical trials. Eli, you had mentioned, that the rising popularity of decentralized trials. I wanted to kind of play the devil's advocate for a second and ask everyone's opinion on this. So we already kind of have a reproducibility problem when it comes to life sciences, particularly in clinical trials. So you have different sites that are collecting data. They're collecting data differently. How do you imagine us being able to address that problem when we're having people adding the variability of collecting data from home? Thanks.
Standardization has to be at the forefront here. To the extent that we don't standardize the results and the data collection, we're going to have a major problem. And as Jeffrey mentioned, unfortunately, different clinical trial sites can operate a little bit differently from one another. So we even have that issue today. What I would say is with the proper software and with the proper solution, we could try and standardize as best we can. It all comes down to training. So can we train the staff that are out there that are delivering, doing the draws, that are conducting the trials in such a uniform manner that we can actually expect reproducible results? But at least that's my take. I'm sure the group might have some other takes.
No, I think that It's an excellent question because it is something we struggle with in terms of even at an institution like Ohio State being able to get clinical trials open at satellite sites or network partners because you don't know that the quality of data is going to be what you would have if you're collecting it in-house. You don't kind of have those checks and balances. So I think it can be done. It has been done elsewhere. It will definitely require a level of oversight. And then kind of back to this whole workforce conversation is, you've got to hire the bodies to do the oversight to make sure that you're doing these trials correctly. But I do think that over the next, coming 5 years, this is something we're going to have to master.
Mahmood Khan, Department of Emergency Medicine, Ohio State. My lab works on stem cells and cardiac regeneration. So one of the challenges that I have, I'm doing a large animal trial for the cardiac patch, is having a proper partner down the road. If I have this technology, whom do I partner with for the next level? And the second very important challenge that we have is we don't have any GMP grade facility here. So even though we have the technology, whom do we partner with to take this to the next level? So I look forward to your comments.
Take that.
If I understand the question right, I think there's a just-in-time component of the administration. Is that correct? That the product has to be administered just in time? So one of the challenges with many of these products, they have to be stored differently than your typical drug. We do not have bags of cell and gene therapy sitting on the shelves of a pharmacy for administration just in time. Many of these products are stored at cryogenically frozen temperatures, so deep freeze. Hospitals may or may not have the capacity to actually have these products on their shelf. There is a line that's being developed that we could potentially do off the shelf, but there is a lot of logistics concerns here. We have actually worked towards a solution where we can actually deliver products in like a hub and spoke model, where we leverage our precision health pharmacies, that we could get a bag of cell products out to a hospital within 2 to 3 hours. So we're able to cut into that just in time. And think about it this way. Many of these products you could schedule the administration for. We could say, patient X, we'll see you next Tuesday at 9 a.m. and we'll administer the product. But in this situation, it's somebody has just had a heart attack or a stroke, and they can benefit from stem cells, but they need to receive it very quickly within hours. And that's what we're trying to solve for. I think from a logistics perspective, there's still work to be done there, but at least we have a framework in place through Cardinal Health, and we can start to attack some of that. So I hope that addresses part of the question.
Thank you.
Sure.
The answer you're looking for is drones. But to address the other part of your question, which was really access to GMP facilities, and so to help the audience, so GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices. Any of the gene and cell therapies that we manufacture that's going to go into a patient has to be manufactured under the FDA mandated GMP practices. So, this has been a challenge, frankly, in Ohio for a while. Particularly in the gene and cell therapy space, trying to build a clean room or a place where you can actually manufacture GMP products is a challenge. You need a very, very exquisite quality system. You need people trained this way. This is when you see pictures online of somebody dressed head to toe in what we call a bunny suit, okay, where it's almost a completely, not quite sterile, but as sterile as you can possibly get environment to make sure that the products that are being manufactured are safe. So the question that is really asking is, hey, we got these therapies we really think we can pull out of the lab, or we think we know what to do here, but we can't manufacture them anywhere. And this has been just a continual challenge in everywhere. A great inflection point in Nationwide Children's Hospital was, 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, right? When you guys really went through a big expansion to be able to have more GMP space. That's how hospitals in particular are trying to build out, these areas to provide novel cell therapies in particular to provide that access. Gene therapies are a little more complicated. They require bigger bioreactors, but again, not to take up too much time, but that's really where a lot of groups are really trying to build, to help with that, to answer that question.
Definitely come talk to us at the end. I think we can help.
All right, well, I said it's going to be tough to solve all this in the time that we had, but we're out of time. So I appreciate everyone's attention. I want to specifically thank the BioOhio members that are here, the corporate support that we have, and as a CMC board member, I really appreciate the investment you've made in this organization to allow it to continue to provide these critical conversations for the community. So appreciate the opportunity, and I'm going to hand it back over to Deb Hackathorn for concluding remarks.
Well, I hope you found this as interesting, you learned something new, and you're really eager to keep following the issues around gene and cell therapy here in Central Ohio and really across Ohio. I certainly encourage you to reach out through social media or other ways to follow BioOhio so that you can keep track of that and continue to explore your interest in the topic. Please also consider coming next Wednesday, where we will cover Ohio's Prosperity Linked to Workforce, featuring Steve Stivers, the new president of the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. Thank you today to the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center and Nationwide Children's Hospital for presenting the CMC Optimal Health Series. Thank you to today's sponsors, Cardinal Health, BioOhio, Armatus Bio, Andolin Biosciences, and Jobs Ohio. Thank you to our online virtual seat patrons and the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation for presenting our live stream partnership with the Columbus Dispatch. And our special thanks and appreciation to today's speakers: Samantha Jaglowski, Timothy Miller, Eli Phillips Jr., and our moderator and host, Eddie Pauline. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Of course, personally, as a Shanahan, I have to wish you all a happy St. Patrick's Day tomorrow. We could not do all of this without you. We look forward to seeing you on Friday, we hope, or next Wednesday, as CMC presents another community conversation. Thank you.